She was already on duty when the scream pierced through the cabin. 9 years of serving drinks hadn't prepared her for this moment, but 8 years as a combat medic before that had. Sarah didn't hesitate. The drink tray clattered to the floor as she sprinted down the narrow aisle of Flight 237, her instincts awakening like a dormant volcano finally erupting after years of silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The airplane shuddered through mild turbulence as Sarah assessed the situation with clinical precision. 3 men had emerged from the back of the plane, faces concealed behind dark fabric masks. The first brandished what looked like a kitchen knife modified with electrical tape. The second clutched a suspicious package with wires visible at the edges. The third was attempting to force his way into the cockpit. Passengers froze in terror, some filming with shaking hands, others pressing emergency call buttons that would summon no immediate help at 35,000 feet. "Everyone stay calm," Sarah whispered to herself, the mantra she'd repeated through mortar attacks and field surgeries in Afghanistan. The airline's mandatory training for flight attendants had covered hijacking scenarios, but it emphasized compliance and de-escalation. Nothing in those corporate training videos had accounted for someone with her background being on board. Sarah's mind raced through threat assessment protocols she hadn't consciously accessed in nearly a decade. The cabin layout suddenly transformed in her perception from a commercial space to a tactical environment. Exit points, potential weapons, civilian positions, all cataloged in seconds as her brain switched from service professional to combat operator. The lead hijacker shouted something in a language Sarah recognized from her deployments. She caught fragments of meaning, enough to understand this wasn't a simple takeover. The words referenced detonation timers and flight path coordinates. This was a coordinated attack with specific targets below. 9 years ago, she had turned in her medical kit and tactical gear, exhausted by the weight of war and the constant proximity to death. The transition to civilian life had been harder than expected, the structured chaos of conflict replaced by the mundane rhythms of customer service. She'd chosen flight attending specifically for its nomadic nature, allowing her to keep moving, never settling long enough for the memories to catch up. Now, as the first terrorist moved toward a young mother shielding her child, Sarah's hand instinctively reached for the tactical knife she no longer carried. Instead, her fingers found the metal coffee pot she'd been preparing to serve from moments earlier. Steam still rose from its contents, the industrial-grade stainless steel heavy in her grip. "Sir, please remain seated," she called out, slipping seamlessly into her flight attendant persona. The slight tremble in her voice wasn't fear. It was adrenaline flooding her system, the body's ancient preparation for combat. The man turned, momentarily confused by the calm authority in her tone. Sarah knew she had seconds to act before the situation deteriorated beyond recovery. The terrorist nearest the cockpit was making progress against the reinforced door, and the one with the suspicious package had begun attaching it to the emergency exit door, a location that, if breached at altitude, would cause catastrophic decompression. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She caught the eye of her fellow flight attendant Melissa and gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the rear galley. In their months flying together, they'd developed the silent communication common among service professionals. But Sarah imbued this gesture with urgency that transcended their usual coordination. Melissa's eyes widened with understanding, and she began quietly moving passengers away from the aisle. The airplane hit another pocket of turbulence, stronger this time. The momentary distraction was all Sarah needed. With movements honed through countless emergency simulations, she lunged forward, the scalding coffee pot swinging in a precise arc. The lead hijacker crumpled as the metal connected with his temple, the knife clattering harmlessly to the floor. She didn't stop to verify the effectiveness of her strike. In one fluid motion, Sarah dropped to retrieve the fallen weapon, muscle memory guiding her hands as she moved toward the second target. The man with the package turned just in time to see her approaching. Too late to counter effectively. "Former 68 Whiskey, 3rd Medical Battalion," Sarah said quietly as she closed the distance. "You picked the wrong flight." The hijacker's eyes registered confusion, then recognition, then fear. Whatever mission briefing they'd received hadn't included the possibility of encountering military-trained personnel among the cabin crew. He reached for something at his waist, but Sarah was already executing a disarm technique that had been drilled into her over hundreds of training hours. The suspicious package remained attached to the exit door as Sarah subdued the second attacker, using minimal force to render him immobile without endangering the pressurized cabin. Cable ties from her service cart became improvised restraints. The remaining terrorist, seeing his companions neutralized in less than 30 seconds, abandoned his assault on the cockpit door and rushed toward her with desperate fury. Sarah intercepted him in the middle of the aisle. Passengers who moments earlier had been paralyzed with terror now watched in astonishment as their seemingly ordinary flight attendant moved with the precision of a special forces operator. She blocked the wild swing of his arm, pivoted inside his guard, and executed a takedown that utilized his own momentum against him. The impact against the floor was controlled, forceful enough to stun, but not to damage the aircraft. "I need medical tape and alcohol wipes from the first aid kit," Sarah called out, her voice steady despite her elevated heart rate. "And someone collect all electronic devices from these three." The cabin erupted into action. A retired police officer identified himself and moved to assist with securing the prisoners. A nurse offered her belt as an additional restraint. An engineer began examining the package on the exit door with careful precision, communicating his observations to Sarah in hushed tones. In the cockpit, the pilots had been alerted to the situation through the internal communication system. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. We're diverting to the nearest appropriate airport and have notified authorities on the ground. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Sarah checked the vital signs of the first attacker, who was regaining consciousness. Her medical training took over as she assessed him for concussion symptoms while simultaneously ensuring he remained restrained. The familiar rhythm of triage centered her, pushing back the flood of adrenaline that threatened to overwhelm her system now that the immediate danger had passed. Carotid pulse strong but elevated, she murmured, fingers pressed against his neck, pupils equal and reactive. "You'll have one hell of a headache, but you'll live to stand trial." Her fellow flight attendants watched with expressions that shifted between shock, admiration, and dawning comprehension. For 9 years, Sarah had been the consummate professional, always punctual, exceptionally thorough with safety procedures, but otherwise unremarkable. She'd shared little about her past, deflecting personal questions with practiced ease. "Who are you?" Melissa whispered as they worked together to secure the cabin for emergency landing. Sarah didn't answer immediately. The question pierced deeper than her colleague could know. Who was she? The combat medic who had saved countless lives in dust-choked field hospitals. The traumatized veteran who had fled from those memories into the anonymous routine of commercial aviation. The woman who had spent nearly a decade hiding her capabilities behind a customer service smile? "Just someone who remembered her training when it mattered," she finally said, checking the restraints on the third attacker. The truth was more complicated. Sarah Matthews had left the military after her third tour, carrying invisible wounds that no field medicine could heal. She had witnessed too many last breaths, applied too many tourniquets to shattered limbs, whispered too many final comforts to soldiers who would never see home again. When her enlistment ended, she had walked away without looking back, seeking the most mundane existence she could find. She had chosen commercial aviation for its structure and predictability. The checklists, the routines, the scripted interactions all provided a framework that kept her functional when the memories threatened to surface. She had become exceptional at appearing ordinary. As the aircraft began its descent toward the emergency landing site, Sarah moved methodically through the cabin, checking seatbelts, securing loose items, and providing reassurance with practiced efficiency. To the passengers, she had transformed from unexpected hero back to consummate professional, the transition seamless and deliberate. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time in 9 years, Sarah had acted without hesitation, without the crippling second-guessing that had characterized her civilian life. The muscle memory, the tactical awareness, the decisive action, none of it had been lost, merely dormant. Through the aircraft windows, she could see the approaching runway flanked by emergency vehicles, their lights flashing against the twilight sky. Law enforcement would be waiting. Questions would follow, her anonymity forever compromised. The thought should have terrified her. Exposure was what she had avoided for nearly a decade. But instead, she felt an unexpected clarity. 30 seconds to touchdown, the captain announced. "Cabin crew, prepare for arrival." Sarah took her position, bracing against the forward bulkhead, as she had done hundreds of times before. But this time, her stance was different. Feet positioned for stability, weight centered, hands ready. It was the posture of someone prepared to move at a moment's notice, not the passive brace taught in flight attendant training. The aircraft touched down with minimal bounce, reverse thrusters roaring as they shed speed along the runway. Within minutes, they were surrounded by tactical teams who boarded with precise efficiency. Sarah provided a concise briefing to the team leader, her terminology and delivery immediately identifying her background to the trained operator. "Former military?" he asked quietly as his team secured the attackers. 68 whiskey, 3 tours, she confirmed. "The package on the exit door hasn't been disabled yet. Your EOD team will want to prioritize that." He nodded, professional respect evident in his expression. "Good work, specialist." The title, one she hadn't heard applied to her in years, settled over her like a familiar uniform. Not uncomfortable, as she might have expected, but fitting in a way her flight attendant blazer never quite had. As passengers were evacuated to the terminal, Sarah remained aboard, providing detailed statements to investigators. Her precise recollection of events, including specific tactical decisions and observations about the attackers' methods, clearly impressed the federal agents who had taken control of the scene. "You saved a lot of lives today," one agent said as they concluded the interview. "Not just on this aircraft. Based on what we found in their communications, this was meant to be the first of several coordinated attacks." Sarah absorbed this information with the clinical detachment she had once applied to battlefield triage. The comparison wasn't lost on her. In both scenarios, emotional distance was necessary for effective action. But unlike those battlefield moments, she now felt something stirring beneath the professional facade. Hours later, as the situation stabilized and the immediate investigative needs were met, Sarah found herself alone in an airport conference room. Through the glass walls, she could see her fellow crew members being debriefed, passengers reuniting with worried family members, and media representatives gathering for what would undoubtedly become an international story. Her phone had been buzzing continuously, airline management, concerned friends, and increasingly, media outlets that had somehow obtained her name. 9 years of carefully constructed anonymity had evaporated in less than 15 minutes of decisive action. Sarah closed her eyes, expecting the familiar panic to rise, the same suffocating pressure that had driven her from military service into the most anonymous career she could find. Instead, she felt an unexpected lightness. For the first time since leaving the battlefield, she had acted without the paralyzing weight of her memories. The skills she had tried to bury had saved lives, rather than merely witnessing their loss. The conference room door opened, and the airline's chief of security entered, followed by a woman in a crisp suit whose bearing immediately identified her as military, despite the civilian clothes. "Specialist Matthews," the woman said, extending her hand. "Colonel Rebecca Winters, military liaison to Homeland Security. I've reviewed the preliminary reports of your actions today. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it." Sarah accepted the handshake automatically, her mind racing to place the insignia barely visible on the colonel's lapel pin. "Special Operations Command." "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied, the formal address coming naturally after years of disuse. "I just did what needed doing." Colonel Winters smiled slightly. "That's exactly what your former commanding officer said you would say when I called him an hour ago." Sarah stiffened. "You contacted my CO?" "Standard procedure when former military personnel are involved in national security incidents," Winters explained, taking a seat across from her. "He had some interesting things to say about your service record. Multiple commendations for actions under fire, advanced tactical medical training, fluency in 3 languages commonly spoken in conflict zones." The airline security chief looked increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation continued, clearly realizing that the quiet flight attendant who had passed through background checks with no red flags was someone entirely different than her personnel file suggested. "My military service ended 9 years ago," Sarah said carefully. "I've been a civilian since then." Colonel Winters leaned forward slightly. And yet, when those men took control of that aircraft, you didn't respond as a civilian flight attendant. You responded as exactly what you are, a highly trained combat medic with tactical experience. The observation hung in the air between them, neither accusation nor praise, simply fact. Sarah didn't respond immediately, considering the implications of what had happened. For 9 years, she had been running from her past, convincing herself that the person she had been in uniform no longer existed. Today had proven otherwise. "There's a program you should know about," Colonel Winters continued, sliding a business card across the table. "Joint Civilian-Military Initiative. We place veterans with specialized training in positions throughout the transportation sector. Not as undercover operators, just as professionals who happen to have additional skills if the worst happens." Sarah looked at the card without touching it. "Like today, exactly like today," Winters confirmed. "The difference is, these individuals receive ongoing training, support, and compensation commensurate with maintaining those skills. They don't have to pretend those years of service never happened." The airline security chief cleared his throat. "We would, of course, be happy to accommodate any such arrangement, Specialist Matthews. What you did today? Well, the company owes you a debt that can't be easily repaid." Sarah finally picked up the card, turning it over in her fingers. The embossed logo was subtle, easily mistaken for a standard government department, unless you knew what to look for. And Sarah did know. She had seen similar insignia during her final deployment, on the uniforms of personnel who operated in spaces between traditional military and civilian response. "I chose this job because it let me disappear," she admitted, the words feeling strange after years of careful omission. "I needed to be someone else for a while." Colonel Winters nodded, understanding evident in her expression. "And now?" The question was simple but profound. 9 years ago, Sarah had walked away from everything she had been, everything she had trained to do. She had hidden her capabilities beneath bland customer service protocols and pretended that the person who could intubate under artillery fire or establish a secure perimeter while treating multiple casualties no longer existed. Today had proven otherwise. That person, that highly trained, decisive operator, had never truly disappeared. She had merely been waiting, dormant but ready, for the moment when she would be needed again. "I need some time to think," Sarah finally said. "Of course." Colonel Winters stood, straightening her jacket. "The card has my direct line. When you're ready to talk, call any time." As they left, Sarah remained seated, contemplating the business card and what it represented. Through the glass walls, she could see the activity in the terminal beginning to settle into the organized chaos that followed any major incident. Security teams were completing their sweeps. Passengers were being rebooked on alternate flights. The machinery of modern aviation was absorbing the disruption and continuing forward. 9 years as a flight attendant had taught Sarah to appreciate that resilience, the systems and protocols that kept thousands of aircraft moving safely through the skies each day. But today had reminded her of something else. Sometimes those systems needed defenders who could operate outside the expected parameters, who could respond when the unthinkable happened. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the missed calls and messages. Among them was a text from her former platoon sergeant, a man who had seen her at her best and worst on the battlefield. "Heard what happened. Never doubted you still had it in you. When you're ready to stop running, there's still work that needs doing. People who need what you can do." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then at the business card in her other hand. For 9 years, she had been a flight attendant with a secret past. Today, that past had saved lives. Tomorrow would require decisions she wasn't yet ready to make. But for the first time in nearly a decade, she was considering possibilities beyond escape and anonymity. Outside the glass walls, the world continued moving forward. And inside, Sarah Matthews, combat medic, flight attendant, reluctant hero, allowed herself to contemplate moving forward with it, no longer hiding from who she had been, but embracing all she could still become. The night after the incident, Sarah sat alone in a hotel room provided by the airline, watching as her face flashed across every news channel. The footage, captured by multiple passengers, showed her fluid takedown of 3 armed hijackers, with nothing but a coffee pot and decades-old training. Social media had already given her a nickname, the serving angel of death. Hashtags trended worldwide, interview requests flooded her inbox, and airline security experts debated her tactics on primetime panels. Sarah muted the television and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, someone caught between two identities that had never been meant to intersect. In her right hand, she still held Colonel Winter's business card, the edges now soft from hours of contemplation. Her phone buzzed with another notification. This time it wasn't media or the airline's crisis management team. It was a text from Dr. Eliza Kent, her former combat trauma supervisor and the woman who had guided Sarah through her darkest days in the field. Saw you on the news. Still the same Sarah, always exactly where you're needed, even when you don't want to be. Call me when you're ready. The message pierced through Sarah's emotional armor in a way that Colonel Winter's formal recruitment attempt hadn't. Eliza had been there during the incident that had ultimately driven Sarah from military service, the mass casualty event that had overwhelmed their forward surgical team and left Sarah questioning everything about her chosen path. Almost without conscious decision, Sarah found herself dialing the number. Eliza answered on the second ring, her voice exactly as Sarah remembered it, steady, warm, and utterly unflappable. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, Eliza said without preamble. How are you holding up? Sarah paused, realizing she had no simple answer. I don't know what I am right now. That's honest, at least. There was no judgment in Eliza's tone, only quiet understanding. Want to tell me what happened? Sarah closed her eyes, the events of the past 24 hours cascading through her mind in fragments. The initial scream that had alerted her, the familiar rush of adrenaline, the muscle memory that had taken over when conscious thought would have been too slow. I became someone I've been trying not to be for 9 years, she finally said. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Eliza responded. Sarah, you never stopped being who you are. You just stopped acknowledging it. The simple truth in those words hit Sarah with unexpected force. For 9 years, she had constructed elaborate barriers between her past and present. Different name badge, different uniform, different protocols. All in service of convincing herself she had left the combat medic behind. They're offering me a position, Sarah said, glancing at the business card again. Something about a joint program for veterans and transportation security. And what do you want to do? The question was exactly what Sarah would have expected from Eliza. No advice, no pressure, just a direct inquiry that cut to the heart of the matter. What did she want? For nearly a decade, her wants had been deliberately small. Routine shifts, quiet layovers, anonymous interactions with passengers she would never see again. I don't know if I can go back to that life, Sarah admitted. Being on constant alert, waiting for the next crisis, carrying that responsibility. You never really left it behind, Eliza pointed out gently. You just channeled it differently. All those safety checks you performed on every flight, the extra attention to security protocols that your colleagues probably thought was just thoroughness, you were still carrying the responsibility, just without the recognition or support. Sarah's mind flashed to a moment 6 months earlier, a seemingly routine flight where she had noticed a passenger exhibiting signs of a stroke. While other crew members had initially dismissed the symptoms as possible intoxication, Sarah had insisted on diverting to the nearest airport. The neurologist who met them at the gate later confirmed that her quick action had likely saved the passenger from permanent brain damage. I've been living in a strange middle ground, Sarah realized aloud, using my training without acknowledging where it came from. That sounds exhausting, Eliza said simply. It had been. The constant vigilance without the framework to support it. The skills kept sharp without the community that understood their cost. All of it had required a compartmentalization that had slowly hollowed her out. What about you? Sarah asked, suddenly curious about the woman who had mentored her through the crucible of combat medicine. Are you still with the 28th? No, Eliza replied, a smile evident in her voice. I run a trauma center in Phoenix now. Still chaotic, still saving lives, just with better coffee and fewer mortars. I train combat medics transitioning to civilian emergency medicine. The revelation settled over Sarah like a possibility she hadn't allowed herself to consider. There were paths between her military past and civilian present, bridges rather than walls. After what happened on that flight, Eliza continued, you're going to have options. Military contractors, security firms, specialized response teams, they'll all come calling. But before you decide anything, I want you to remember something. What's that? You left service because you needed to, not because you weren't exceptional at it. Whatever you choose now should be because you want it, not because you feel obligated to return to a life you deliberately walked away from. Sarah let those words sink in as she watched her own image flash across the muted television again. The footage showed the aftermath of her intervention, her standing protectively between the restrained hijackers and the passengers, giving clear instructions to the crew, maintaining order until authorities arrived. "I need to figure out who I am now," Sarah said finally. "Not who I was 9 years ago, and not who I've been pretending to be." "That sounds like an excellent starting point," Eliza replied. "And Sarah, whatever you decide, don't do it alone this time. That was your mistake last time, thinking you had to carry everything by yourself." After they hung up, Sarah stood and paced the hotel room, restless energy coursing through her body. The adrenaline had long since faded, but something else had taken its place, a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. She picked up her phone again and scrolled to a contact she had never deleted but rarely acknowledged. Captain Marcus Rivera, her former commanding officer, and the man who had tried to convince her to stay when she'd submitted her discharge papers. Without giving herself time to reconsider, she pressed the call button. His voice, when he answered, held none of the surprise she had expected. "Matthews, figured I'd hear from you after Winters dropped my name." "Sir," she said, the formal address automatic even after all these years. "I'm guessing you've seen the news." "Hard to miss," he replied dryly. 3 tangos down with a coffee pot and some zip ties. That's the Matthews the First, remember? The familiar cadence of his speech brought an unexpected smile to Sarah's face. Captain Rivera had never been one for unnecessary words or emotional declarations, but his steady presence had anchored their medical unit through countless crises. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted, the confession easier with someone who had seen her at both her strongest and most vulnerable. "You know, I never thought you should have left," he said after a moment. "But I understood why you did. That last mission in Kandahar, it broke something in all of us. But you carried the heaviest load that day." Sarah closed her eyes, the memories she had spent years suppressing suddenly vivid and immediate. The explosion that had collapsed their field hospital, the frantic triage in the rubble, her hands moving from patient to patient as the sound of approaching hostiles grew louder. She had saved 17 lives that day, working without rest until reinforcements arrived 18 hours later. The commendation that followed had meant nothing compared to the weight of those she couldn't save. "I couldn't do it anymore," she said quietly. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces." "I know," Rivera replied, his voice gentler than she remembered. "But running from who you are never works long term. Yesterday proved that. So what do I do? Sign up with Winters' program? Go back to the front lines?" "I left that life for a reason." "Maybe it's not about going back," Rivera suggested. "Maybe it's about moving forward with everything you are, not just the parts you're comfortable acknowledging." The concept resonated with something Eliza had said. Sarah had been living a half-life, neither fully civilian nor properly supported, as someone with her specialized background. Perhaps the answer wasn't choosing between identities but integrating them. "Winters' program," she began hesitantly. "Is it legitimate?" "It is," Rivera confirmed. "Started about 4 years ago after a similar incident on a cross-country train. They don't want operators, Matthews. They want professionals who can become operators when necessary. The rest of the time you'd still be a flight attendant, just one with ongoing training, support, and resources." Sarah mulled this over, weighing it against the emptiness that had characterized much of her civilian life. The airline uniform had been a disguise, but it had also become comfortable, a role she knew how to play perfectly. What would it mean to continue in that role but without the constant dissociation from her true capabilities? "I need some time," she finally said. "Take it," Rivera replied. "But Matthews, this time, whatever you decide, do it because it's what you want, not just what you're running from." As she ended the call, Sarah realized both Eliza and Rivera had offered essentially the same advice, a sign she had surrounded herself with people who understood her better than she sometimes understood herself. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. A gentle knock at her hotel room door interrupted her reflection. Sarah approached cautiously, years of training making her check the peephole before unlocking the deadbolt. Outside stood Melissa, her fellow flight attendant from the hijacked flight. "Hey," Melissa said, her expression a mix of hesitation and determination. "I hope it's okay that I came by. The airline gave me your room number. I needed to talk to you." Sarah stepped back, allowing her colleague to enter. In the aftermath of the incident, she had been separated from the rest of the crew for debriefing, missing the communal processing that typically followed traumatic events in aviation. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked as Melissa took a seat in the armchair by the window. Melissa gave a small, incredulous laugh. "That's what you're asking me? After what you did, I should be asking you that question." Sarah shrugged, uncomfortable with the implicit heroism in her colleague's tone. "I just reacted. Training took over." "Yeah, training none of us knew you had." Melissa leaned forward, eyes intent. 9 years, Sarah. We've flown together for 3 of those, and I never once suspected you were whatever you were before this." "Combat medic," Sarah supplied, the words feeling strange in her mouth after years of deliberate omission. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Specialized in battlefield trauma and tactical response. Melissa shook her head slowly, absorbing this information. "Why did you never mention it? Not even once?" The question wasn't accusatory, just genuinely puzzled, and it deserved an honest answer. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped loosely between her knees. "Because I was trying to be someone else," she admitted. "Someone who hadn't seen what I'd seen or done what I'd done. Someone simpler." "And now?" Sarah glanced at the television, still silently playing footage of the incident. "Now I don't think that's possible anymore." Melissa followed her gaze to the screen, where Sarah's face appeared yet again, this time in a split screen alongside terrorism experts analyzing her techniques. "They're saying you saved everyone on that flight. That if you hadn't been there..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Both women had been in aviation long enough to know the potential outcomes of a successful hijacking. "I've been authorized to tell you that the airline wants to offer you something," Melissa continued after a moment. "A new position. Some kind of security liaison role, still flying, but with additional responsibilities. They were very vague about the details, but it sounds like they want to keep you close without explicitly advertising that they have someone with your background on staff." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. The offer would dovetail neatly with Colonel Winter's program, the airline maintaining plausible deniability while benefiting from her specialized training. It made perfect strategic sense. "What do you think I should do?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with the question. She had never sought Melissa's advice on anything more significant than layover restaurant recommendations. Melissa considered the question with unexpected seriousness. "I think," she said slowly, "that I watched you yesterday, and for the first time since I've known you, you weren't performing. You weren't playing the role of Sarah the flight attendant. You were just fully present, completely yourself." The observation struck Sarah with the force of revelation. Melissa was right. In those crucial moments, she hadn't been divided between past and present, between who she had been and who she pretended to be. She had simply acted, integrated and whole. "Whatever lets you be that person," Melissa continued, "that's what you should do." After Melissa left, Sarah stood at the window, watching the lights of the city below. Tomorrow would bring more debriefings, more decisions, more paths diverging from the careful routine she had constructed. But tonight, for the first time in 9 years, she felt the boundaries between her compartmentalized selves beginning to dissolve. She picked up Colonel Winter's card again and reached for her phone. Whatever came next, she would face it as her complete self, not running toward her past or away from it, but moving forward with all the complicated truth of who she was. The call was brief, practical, and devoid of the recruitment pressure she had expected. Colonel Winter simply scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon, where they would discuss options with no obligation. As Sarah ended the call, she felt something she hadn't experienced in nearly a decade. Not peace exactly, but integration. The weight of divided identity beginning to lift. Her phone chimed with one final message for the night. a text from an unknown number that had somehow bypassed her privacy settings. The content made her breath catch. Watched you take down those 3 like you were back in Kabul. Some skills never fade. When you're done with the media circus, the old team is gathering next month. Your place is still open. Rodriguez specialist Elena Rodriguez had been Sarah's closest friend in the unit, a fellow medic whose unflinching competence had made her the person everyone wanted beside them when situations deteriorated. They had lost contact after Sarah's abrupt departure from service, another relationship sacrificed to her need for complete separation from her past. Sarah traced the words on the screen, a different kind of future suddenly materializing alongside the options presented by Winters and the airline. Not a return to military service or a continuation of her divided existence, but a reconnection with the community that had once been her foundation. The people who knew exactly what she had experienced because they had lived it alongside her. Tomorrow would bring decisions. Tonight brought something equally valuable. The realization that whatever path she chose, she would no longer walk it alone or fragmented. The incident had shattered the careful walls she had built between her identities, but in their collapse, she had rediscovered something essential, the integrated core of who she truly was. Sarah Matthews, combat medic, flight attendant, reluctant hero, closed her eyes and allowed herself, for the first time in 9 years, to simply be all of these things at once. The sensation was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, just unfamiliar after so long divided. But as she drifted towards sleep, she recognized it for what it was, the first step toward wholeness. The headquarters of the Joint Aviation Security Initiative occupied 3 unmarked floors of an otherwise unremarkable office building in Northern Virginia. Sarah stood in the lobby, security badge clipped to her blazer, not her airline uniform, but not civilian clothes either. She had chosen a middle ground, professional attire that acknowledged both her past and potential future. Colonel Winters met her at the elevator, extending a handshake that felt more like peer recognition than military formality. "Glad you decided to come, Matthews. This conversation is long overdue." The colonel led her through a series of security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last, until they reached a conference room where 5 people waited around a polished table. Sarah recognized 2 immediately, Captain Rivera and, surprisingly, the CEO of her airline. The others wore the subtle indicators of various agencies, 1 military, 2 civilian, with the unmistakable bearing of former special operations. "Please, sit." Winters gestured to an empty chair. "Everyone here knows what happened on Flight 237. What they don't know is what you intend to do next." Sarah took the offered seat, aware of the evaluating gazes from around the table. These weren't recruiters trying to sell her on a program. These were operational leaders assessing her potential fit within an existing framework. "Before I consider any offers," Sarah said carefully, "I need to understand what this is. Really understand it, not just the recruitment pitch." A slight smile touched Winters' face. "Direct as ever." "Good." She pressed a button, and the wall behind her transformed into a digital display showing a global map dotted with pulsing indicators. JASI was formed after we recognized a critical vulnerability in our transportation infrastructure. Conventional security measures are predictable, visible, and therefore mappable by those with malicious intent. The CEO, Alan Mercer, whom Sarah had only ever seen in company-wide video addresses, leaned forward. "The aviation industry spends billions on visible security. Metal detectors, uniformed personnel, obvious protocols, but our most effective asset has always been the unpredictable human element. Like a combat medic working as a flight attendant," Rivera added, giving Sarah a knowing look. "Exactly," Winters confirmed. 5 years ago, we began identifying veterans with specialized training who had entered civilian transportation roles. Not to recruit them as undercover operatives, that would violate numerous regulations and ethical boundaries, but to support them in maintaining their skills while providing an additional layer of security within the existing framework. Sarah studied the map, noting concentrations around major transportation hubs. "How many?" "Currently, 342 active participants across air, rail, and maritime transportation." One of the agency representatives replied. "All voluntary. All maintaining their primary civilian roles, but with additional training, resources, and compensation." And what exactly would I be agreeing to? Sarah asked, directing the question to both Winters, and her airline's CEO Mercer answered first. From the airline's perspective, your formal role would remain as a flight attendant, with a lateral designation as a safety specialist. This provides administrative cover for additional training days and flexible scheduling. Your salary would increase by approximately 35% to compensate for the additional responsibilities. And those responsibilities would be? Colonel Winters took over. Quarterly training to maintain tactical medical skills. Periodic security briefings on emerging threats to aviation. Voluntary participation in scenario planning and protocol development. Most importantly, you'd be connected to a network of professionals with similar backgrounds, providing both operational support and, equally crucial, peer support. That last element caught Sarah's attention more than the others. The isolation of her post-military years had been entirely self-imposed, but no less damaging for that choice. The thought of reconnecting with others who understood the unique challenges of straddling military and civilian worlds held more appeal than she had anticipated. And in crisis situations? She pressed. What would be expected? Exactly what you did on Flight 237, Rivera said. Use your judgment, apply your training, protect lives. The difference is, you'd have institutional support before, during, and after such events. Sarah considered this, weighing it against the emptiness that had characterized much of her civilian career. Why me? Why now? There must be hundreds of veterans in transportation roles with similar backgrounds. 3 reasons. Winters replied without hesitation. First, your actions on that flight demonstrated that your skills remain exceptional despite years without formal maintenance. Second, your former commanding officers speak of you with rare unanimity regarding both your technical abilities and leadership qualities. And third, most importantly, you're now visible in a way you weren't before. The choice to maintain anonymity is no longer fully yours. The last point struck home with uncomfortable precision. The media attention had already begun to fade, but her name and face had been irrevocably connected to the incident. Some level of public identity as a former combat medic was now inevitable. I left that life for reasons that haven't changed, Sarah said quietly. The weight of constant vigilance. The responsibility for lives in crisis. The aftermath of decisions made under impossible circumstances. Which is precisely why this program exists. The female agency representative interjected. She had been silent until now, observing Sarah with analytical intensity, to provide the framework and support that was missing when you and many others transitioned to civilian life. She slid a tablet across the table displaying personnel files, not military records, but profiles of JASI participants. Sarah scanned through them, recognizing the pattern immediately. Former combat medics, tactical specialists, intelligence officers, all now working as pilots, conductors, ship engineers, air traffic controllers, all carrying specialized skills beneath ordinary civilian identities. These people aren't operatives, the woman continued. They're transportation professionals who happen to have extraordinary capabilities. If the situation demands it, the program simply acknowledges that reality instead of pretending it doesn't exist. Sarah looked up from the tablet, her gaze meeting Rivera's. You're part of this. It wasn't a question, but he nodded confirmation. 3 years now, I coordinate the medical training modules. It's given me a way to use everything I know without having to choose between worlds. The phrase resonated deeply. For 9 years, Sarah had been caught between worlds, neither fully civilian nor connected to her military past, constantly compartmentalizing aspects of herself to maintain the boundary. The exhaustion of that divided existence had become so familiar she had stopped recognizing it as abnormal. I need time to consider this, she finally said. Of course. Winters agreed readily. This isn't a decision to be made impulsively. But, while you're considering, there's someone you should meet. She gestured toward the door, which opened to admit a man Sarah didn't immediately recognize. He was in his late 30s, casually dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt, with the confident bearing of someone comfortable in his skin. It took her a moment to place him, and when she did, her breath caught. Jason Cole. Winters introduced unnecessarily. Passenger on Flight 237. Seat 14C. Sarah remembered him now, the man who had helped secure one of the attackers after she had made the initial takedown. He had moved with practiced efficiency, using his belt as an improvised restraint without being asked. "Ms. Matthews." Cole extended his hand. "I've been hoping to thank you properly." His grip was firm, his gaze direct. Up close, Sarah noticed the subtle indicators she had missed during the crisis. The balanced stance, the situational awareness, the calm assessment in his eyes. "You're military," she observed. "Was," he corrected with a slight smile. "Marine Corps, Force Recon. Now I'm an architectural engineer who travels too much for work, and a JASI participant for the past 2 years. The revelation shifted Sarah's understanding of the incident. She hadn't been entirely alone on that flight. Another trained professional had been present, ready to act if needed. The knowledge settled something in her that had been restless since the hijacking. "Why didn't you move first?" she asked, genuine curiosity overriding social niceties. Cole's smile widened. "You had it handled. My training taught me to recognize competence when I see it. Besides," he added with a gesture toward Winters, "part of the protocol is to maintain cover, unless absolutely necessary. You eliminated the need for me to break mine." Colonel Winters allowed them a few minutes of conversation before steering the meeting back to its purpose. "Mr. Cole represents what we're offering, Sarah. Not a return to military service or a continuation of your divided existence, but integration, a way to honor all aspects of your training and experience while building something new." Sarah looked around the table, seeing not recruitment officers, but potential colleagues, people who understood the complex reality of carrying specialized capabilities through civilian life. The weight of decision pressed against her, not with anxiety but with possibility. "I appreciate the time you've all taken," she said finally. "I'll have an answer for you within the week." As the meeting concluded, Captain Rivera walked her to the elevator. They stood in companionable silence until the doors opened. Then he turned to her with uncharacteristic hesitation. "The program isn't perfect, Matthews. Nothing is. But it's a hell of a lot better than carrying everything alone." Sarah nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. "That's what I'm starting to understand." Outside the building, the spring sunshine warmed her face as she considered her options. The airline would hold her position regardless of her decision about JASI. Her actions on Flight 237 had earned her that much job security. She could return to her carefully constructed anonymity, albeit with more public recognition than before. Or she could step into this new framework that promised integration instead of division. Her phone vibrated with an incoming message. Elena Rodriguez, responding to Sarah's tentative outreach the previous evening. "Dinner tonight? I'm in DC for a conference. Lots to catch up on." Sarah smiled at the synchronicity. The universe seemed determined to reconnect her with her past, not as a retreat but as a foundation for moving forward. She typed a quick confirmation, then hailed a taxi to her hotel. There were hours before dinner, time to process everything she had learned. In her room, Sarah spread the JASI materials across the bed: program outlines, training schedules, participant profiles. The structure was more flexible than she had expected, designed to accommodate the varied circumstances of those involved. Some participants maintained complete public anonymity, while others, like Cole, operated with a transparent professional identity separate from their military background. A knock at her door interrupted her review. When she opened it, she found Melissa standing in the hallway, holding 2 coffee cups and wearing an expression of determined friendship. "I figured you could use this after your meeting," she said, offering one of the cups. "The airline HR representative mentioned you'd be meeting with some joint security program today." Sarah accepted the coffee, touched by the gesture. News travels fast. "Only within certain circles," Melissa assured her. "The rest of the crew hasn't been briefed beyond the basics. May I come in?" Sarah stepped aside, allowing her colleague to enter. Melissa glanced at the materials spread across the bed but made no comment about them, instead taking a seat by the window. "I've been thinking about what happened," Melissa began, her tone carefully neutral. "Not just the hijacking, but how you responded to it. It was like watching someone switch languages mid-sentence, fluent in both, but completely different vocabularies. The metaphor was surprisingly apt." Sarah had been living in translation for 9 years. converting her military instincts into civilian behaviors, never fully authentic in either context. That's what it felt like from the inside, too, Sarah admitted. Like I'd been speaking a second language for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't my native tongue. Melissa nodded thoughtfully. The thing is, I keep wondering, if you join whatever program they're offering, what happens to Sarah, the flight attendant? The one who knows exactly how I take my coffee and covers my galley checks when my kids are sick and remembers every regular passenger's name? The question caught Sarah off guard. In all her deliberation, she had been focused on reconciling her military past with her civilian present, not on the relationships she had built within that civilian identity. She doesn't disappear, Sarah said slowly, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. She's just not the whole story anymore. Was she ever? No, Sarah conceded. But she was the only part one was willing to acknowledge. Melissa sipped her coffee, considering this. For what it's worth, I think you should take whatever they're offering. Not because of what you did during the hijacking, but because of what I saw in you afterward. What do you mean? You were calm, focused, completely present. But more than that, you seemed at peace with yourself in a way I've never seen before. Like you weren't fighting against something internally anymore. The observation matched Sarah's own experience of those moments. The sudden integration of her divided selves, the release of energy that had been bound up in maintaining that separation. Thank you, Sarah said simply, for seeing that. For saying it. After Melissa left, Sarah returned to the JASI materials with fresh perspective. This wasn't about choosing between identities or returning to a past role. It was about moving forward with all of who she was. The combat medic's skill and the flight attendant's care, the tactical awareness and the human connection. That evening, Sarah met Elena Rodriguez at a small restaurant away from the tourist centers of DC. The years fell away as they embraced, the familiar connection of shared experience transcending time and distance. Look at you, Elena said, taking the seat across from Sarah. Still the same Matthews, just with better civilian clothes? Sarah laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. And you? Still saving lives on the front lines? Different front lines, Elena corrected. Emergency department at Walter Reed. Turns out trauma skills translate pretty well to civilian medicine, especially when you've got proper equipment and lighting. They ordered drinks, then food, conversation flowing easily between them. Elena shared stories of her transition to civilian healthcare, the challenges and rewards of treating patients without the constant threat of environmental dangers. Sarah described her years in aviation, carefully edited until now. So, Elena said finally, setting down her glass, I reached out to you. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You know about that? I've been consulting with their medical training division for about a year, Elena admitted. Rivera brought me in to help design protocols specific to in-flight emergencies. When your name came up after the hijacking, I may have advocated rather strongly for your recruitment. You didn't think to mention this in your message? Elena shrugged, unrepentant. Would you have agreed to dinner if I had? The question gave Sarah pause. Would she have avoided the meeting if she had known it was connected to JASI? A week ago, perhaps. Now, she wasn't sure. The thing is, Matthews, Elena continued, what you did on that flight, that wasn't just training or muscle memory. That was who you are at your core. The person who moves toward danger when others can't. The one who sees what needs doing and does it, regardless of the cost. Sarah stared into her glass, the amber liquid reflecting the restaurant's soft lighting. That's what I was running from, the weight of always being that person. And how has that been working out for you? Elena asked gently. 9 years of pretending to be someone else. 9 years of dividing yourself in half. Has it brought you peace? The question hung between them, honest and without judgment. Sarah considered it with equal honesty. No, she finally admitted. It hasn't. But I'm not sure I can go back to being who I was before either. No one's asking you to, Elena said firmly. The whole point of JASI is integration, not regression. You bring everything you've learned in both worlds. The discipline and tactical skills from service, the emotional intelligence and civilian awareness from your airline career. Sarah studied her friend's face, seeing the conviction there. You really believe in this program. I believe in what it's trying to do, Elena corrected. Create space for people like us to be whole instead of fragmented. To use all of our capabilities without having to deny parts of ourselves. The restaurant had grown busier around them, the ambient noise providing a cushion of privacy for their conversation. Sarah watched a family celebrate at a nearby table, a child's birthday marked with candles and off-key singing. The ordinary joy of civilian life, the very thing she had fought to protect during her service years. I think I've been afraid, Sarah said quietly, that if I acknowledge that part of myself again, the part that can assess threats and neutralize them without hesitation, I'll lose the person I've become. The one who notices when a passenger is anxious about flying or when a colleague needs an extra break during a long flight. Elena reached across the table, her hand covering Sarah's briefly. Those aren't separate people, Matthews. They never were. They're just different facets of the same person. Someone who sees needs and meets them, whether those needs are combat medical intervention or human kindness at 35,000 feet. The simple truth of those words resonated through Sarah's chest. She had spent 9 years treating her military and civilian identities as incompatible opposites, when in fact they were complementary aspects of a single integrated self. As they finished dinner, Elena handed Sarah a small box across the table. Before you decide anything, I want you to have this. I've been carrying it since you left the unit. Sarah opened the box carefully. Inside lay her combat medic badge, polished and preserved, alongside a folded note written in her own handwriting. A letter she had left for Elena when she had departed so abruptly 9 years earlier. You kept this, Sarah said softly, touching the badge with reverent fingers. I knew someday you'd find your way back, not to the battlefield, but to yourself. Elena's smile held no triumph, only quiet certainty. The person who wrote that letter was running away from something. The person sitting across from me now is finally ready to run towards something instead. Sarah refolded the letter without reading it. She knew what it contained: apologies, explanations, the desperate justifications of someone fleeing trauma without processing it. That person felt distant now, connected but distinct from the woman she had become. Later that night, in the quiet of her hotel room, Sarah made her decision, not impulsively, but with the clarity that comes from finally seeing all aspects of a complex truth. She sent 2 messages, one to Colonel Winters accepting the position with JASI, and one to her airline's chief of staff confirming her return to flight status under the new arrangement. Then she opened her laptop and began composing a 3rd message, this one to the flight crew she had served alongside for years. They deserved to know that while her role was evolving, the person they had come to rely on wasn't disappearing. She was simply becoming more fully herself. As she wrote, Sarah felt the familiar tension between her divided selves finally begin to dissolve. Not into simplicity. Life would never be that, but into something more honest, more integrated, more whole. The combat medic and the flight attendant. The protector and the caregiver. Not separate identities in conflict, but complementary aspects of a single authentic self. Outside her window, the capital city continued its evening rhythms, citizens moving through their lives unaware of the invisible guardians among them, people like Sarah who carried specialized capabilities beneath ordinary identities. Not because they sought recognition or power, but because they had been shaped by extraordinary circumstances and chosen to channel those experiences into continued service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, training schedules to coordinate, protocols to learn, relationships to navigate with new awareness. But for the first time in 9 years, Sarah would face those challenges as her complete self, no longer running from her past or hiding her capabilities, but integrating all she had been and all she had become into the person she was still becoming. The weight hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed, from the exhausting burden of divided identity into the grounding anchor of purpose fully embraced. And in that transformation, Sarah Matthews, combat medic, flight attendant, JASI operative, human being, had finally found her way home to herself. 6 months after joining the Joint Aviation Security Initiative, Sarah Matthews boarded Flight 442 from Denver to Atlanta with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her center. The familiar weight of her flight attendant uniform felt different now, not a disguise, but simply one aspect of a multifaceted professional identity. As she moved through pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency, she carried with her the integration of worlds that had once seemed irreconcilable. "Good morning, Ms. Matthews," the captain greeted her during the crew briefing, his eyes holding the subtle recognition shared among JASI participants. Captain James Donovan was another program member, former Air Force pararescue before transitioning to commercial aviation. Their shared background remained unspoken in professional settings, but the mutual awareness created an invisible layer of security that passengers would never perceive. "Morning, Captain," Sarah replied, accepting the flight manifest with a nod that communicated more than words. "Full flight today. Weather looks clear all the way to Atlanta." The ordinary exchange contained the comfortable rhythm of professionals who understood each other beyond their current roles. 6 months of JASI training had connected Sarah to a network of similar individuals throughout the transportation sector, people carrying specialized capabilities beneath civilian identities, not as undercover operatives, but as genuine professionals with additional layers of expertise. The passengers boarded with the usual mix of business efficiency and vacation excitement. Sarah greeted them with the warm professionalism she had always displayed, but now there was an authenticity to her presence that had been missing during her years of compartmentalized existence. She no longer expended energy maintaining boundaries between her military past and civilian present. They had become integrated aspects of a single professional identity. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Sarah completed her service duties before taking a moment to observe the cabin. The practice scan wasn't paranoia or hypervigilance. It was simply situational awareness, a habit that had once felt like a burden, but now registered as professional thoroughness. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, not her personal device, but the secure JASI communicator that maintained encrypted connection with program coordinators on the ground. She checked it discreetly, reading the brief message with the calm focus that had become her hallmark. Possible medical situation developing on inbound AK 317, passenger exhibiting symptoms consistent with hemorrhagic fever, CDC alerts active. Your flight unaffected, but Atlanta protocols elevating. Stand by for updates. Sarah acknowledged receipt with a single tap, processing the information without alarm. The JASI network functioned as an early warning system for transportation professionals, providing real-time updates about situations that might require specialized response. Most alerts, like this one, simply ensured participants remained informed about developing situations without requiring direct involvement. She returned the device to her pocket and continued her duties, the knowledge filed but not forgotten. This balance, maintaining awareness without fixation, had been one of the most valuable aspects of her JASI training. The program had helped her channel her combat medical experience into a sustainable vigilance that enhanced rather than disrupted her civilian role. "Excuse me," a passenger called as Sarah passed his seat. "I think the man next to me needs help. He doesn't look well." Sarah turned, professional concern immediately engaged. In seat 23B, an elderly gentleman sat with his head tilted back, skin pale and damp with perspiration. His breathing appeared labored, his left hand clutching weakly at his chest. "Sir?" Sarah approached, medical assessment already running. "Can you hear me? Are you experiencing chest pain?" The man's eyes fluttered, focusing on her with difficulty. "Pressure," he managed. "Like elephant sitting." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I need the emergency medical kit," she called to Melissa, who was working the same flight. "And notify the captain we have a suspected cardiac event." The training took over, not just her military medical background or her flight attendant protocols, but the integrated skills JASI had helped her refine. She eased the passenger into a position that facilitated breathing while maintaining circulation, her movements calm and precise. "Sir, my name is Sarah. I have medical training. I'm going to help you, but I need to ask you a few questions. Are you taking any medications for your heart?" The passenger nodded weakly, and his seatmate spoke up. "He takes something for blood pressure. He showed me before takeoff because he was worried about forgetting it." Sarah nodded, continuing her assessment as Melissa returned with the medical kit and the automated announcement requesting any medical professionals on board. 2 passengers responded. a nurse from row 17 and a cardiologist from first class. Possible MI. Sarah briefed the cardiologist as he arrived, using medical terminology that would have seemed out of place from a flight attendant 6 months ago. Pain began approximately 3 minutes ago. Patient reports pressure sensation, diaphoresis evident, possible radiation to left arm. The cardiologist raised an eyebrow but immediately focused on the patient. Good assessment. Let's get him aspirin and check his vitals. They worked together seamlessly, Sarah's combat medical training complementing the doctor's specialized knowledge. When the patient's condition stabilized enough for conversation, the cardiologist turned to Sarah with professional curiosity. That was an unusually thorough initial assessment for cabin crew. Military background? Combat medic, Sarah confirmed simply. 3 tours. The doctor nodded with understanding. My son's in the 28th medical now. It shows in your work. This gentleman is lucky you were here. The acknowledgement, casual, professional, without fanfare, felt different than it would have a year ago. Sarah no longer needed to hide her background or explain her capabilities. They were simply part of who she was, integrated, rather than compartmentalized. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, due to our medical situation, we'll be making an expedited approach into Atlanta. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We've been given priority clearance and will be landing in approximately 20 minutes. Sarah continued monitoring the patient as the aircraft began its descent, the cardiologist remaining nearby. When her JASI communicator vibrated again, she checked it discreetly. A simple update confirming medical response teams would meet their flight at the gate. They'll have a team waiting for us, she told the cardiologist. Full cardiac response unit. He nodded, impressed. That was fast. Usually takes more coordination. Sarah didn't explain the JASI connection that had facilitated the rapid response. Some aspects of the program remained confidential, not because they were classified, but because their effectiveness relied on quiet integration into existing systems rather than visible disruption. As the aircraft touched down, Sarah felt the familiar sense of professional satisfaction. Not the adrenaline rush of crisis response, but the steady confidence of competence properly applied. The patient would receive advanced care within minutes, his chances of full recovery significantly improved by the coordinated response that had begun the moment she recognized his symptoms. Emergency medical personnel boarded as soon as the aircraft reached the gate, transferring the patient efficiently to their care. Sarah provided a concise handover, her terminology precisely calibrated, medical enough for accuracy, accessible enough for the broader context. Outstanding work, the lead paramedic commented as they prepared to depart. You military medical? Previously, Sarah acknowledged. Now I'm just doing my job. The simple statement contained the truth she had come to embrace over the past 6 months. Her military experience wasn't separate from her current role. It was foundational to it, informing every aspect of her professional identity without defining its boundaries. After the medical team departed and regular deplaning resumed, Captain Donovan approached her in the galley. Nicely handled, he said quietly. JASI coordinator, already sent confirmation. Patient stabilized, good prognosis. The cardiologist specifically commended your initial assessment in his report. Sarah nodded, accepting the information without particular pride or surprise. The validation felt appropriate rather than exceptional, the natural outcome of bringing her full capabilities to bear on a situation where they were needed. 8-hour layover before the return leg, Donovan continued. I was going to head over to the Atlanta Training Center for a few hours if you're interested. They've got a new simulation for in-flight medical emergencies that incorporates some of your protocols from last month's development session. The invitation represented another aspect of Sarah's integrated professional life, the ongoing refinement of her skills through the JASI program, not as a separate obligation, but as a natural extension of her aviation career. I'll join you, she agreed. I'd like to see how they've implemented the altitude adjustment factors we discussed. As the aircraft emptied and the crew completed their post-flight duties, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 1 year earlier, she had been living a divided existence. Her combat medical training buried beneath layers of deliberate forgetting, her flight attendant persona, a carefully constructed alternative that never quite contained the whole of who she was. The hijacking on Flight 237 had shattered that artificial division, forcing an integration that had initially seemed impossible. Now, 6 months into her participation in JASI, the integration felt not just possible but natural, the inevitable alignment of capabilities and identity that had been misaligned for too long. Earth to Matthews. Melissa's voice broke through her reflection. You coming to the hotel or heading straight to that mysterious training facility you never fully explain? Sarah smiled at her colleague's good-natured curiosity. While the details of JASI remained confidential, she had been honest with her crew about the general nature of her additional responsibilities. Training center first, she confirmed. Want to join us? They've got a medical simulation I think you'd find interesting. Melissa hesitated, surprised by the invitation. They allow non-military personnel? The program isn't exclusively military, Sarah explained, choosing her words carefully. It's about integrating specialized skills into civilian transportation security. Your experience with passenger management during medical emergencies would actually be valuable input. The offer represented a small but significant shift in Sarah's approach. Rather than maintaining rigid boundaries between her JASI activities and her airline colleagues, she had begun identifying appropriate connections, ways to strengthen both worlds through thoughtful integration. I might take you up on that, Melissa said with genuine interest. After that cardiac event, I could use some additional training beyond the basic first aid we get in Recurrent. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the aircraft, Sarah's JASI communicator vibrated once more. The message was brief but consequential. Protocol activation, Kandahar reunion. Tomorrow, 0800, Atlanta Regional. Full team assembly. Sarah felt a momentary tightness in her chest. Not anxiety, but anticipation. The Kandahar reunion protocol was specific to her former unit, a designation reserved for situations where multiple team members would be operating in the same region. It meant Elena Rodriguez and possibly others from her combat deployment would be arriving in Atlanta. The timing wasn't coincidental. JASI coordinators deliberately created opportunities for unit reunions when operational schedules allowed, recognizing that the bonds formed in combat environments provided unique psychological support that enhanced operational effectiveness in civilian contexts. Everything okay? Melissa asked, noting Sarah's momentary pause. Better than okay, Sarah replied with genuine warmth. Some old friends are coming to town. The Atlanta Training Center occupied 3 floors of an unmarked office building near the airport, accessible but discreet, its purpose obscured by generic corporate signage. Inside, however, the facility housed some of the most advanced transportation security training equipment in the country, from full-scale aircraft cabin simulators to virtual reality systems that could recreate crisis scenarios with unsettling realism. Captain Donovan led Sarah and Melissa through security, the biometric scanners recognizing his credentials instantly. For Melissa, the process required temporary authorization, her expression shifting from curiosity to impressed understanding as they entered the main training floor. This is not what I expected, she admitted, taking in the sophisticated simulation environments and the diverse professionals moving between them. I thought it would be more military? Sarah suggested with a smile. That's a common misconception. JASI isn't about militarizing civilian transportation. It's about integrating specialized skills within existing frameworks. The distinction was crucial to Sarah's own acceptance of the program. JASI didn't seek to transform flight attendants into undercover operatives or pilots into military assets. Instead, it recognized that many transportation professionals already possessed specialized backgrounds and provided a structure that supported those capabilities without compromising their primary civilian roles. Matthews, a familiar voice called from across the room. About damn time you showed up. Sarah turned to see Elena Rodriguez approaching, dressed in civilian medical scrubs but carrying herself with the unmistakable confidence of someone who had operated in far more demanding environments. Thought you weren't coming until tomorrow, Sarah replied, embracing her former unit member without hesitation. Got an earlier flight, Elena explained. Couldn't pass up the chance to see you in your natural habitat. The easy camaraderie between them spoke to connections that transcended time and context, professional respect forged in combat environments that remained relevant in their current roles. For Sarah, these relationships had become an essential part of her integrated identity, bridging the gap between her military past and civilian present. Rodriguez, this is Melissa Chen, my colleague from Transglobal. Sarah introduced. She's here to observe the medical emergency simulation. Elena extended her hand without hesitation. Always good to meet the people who keep Matthews in line. She giving you the condensed version of her capabilities. Or has she finally learned to take credit where it's due? Still working on that part, Melissa replied with a knowing smile, but she's getting better. The comfortable exchange represented another aspect of Sarah's evolving professional identity, the gradual dissolution of barriers between her various roles. 6 months ago, she would have maintained rigid separation between her JASI connections and airline colleagues. Now, she recognized appropriate opportunities for integration that strengthened both worlds. As they moved toward the simulation area, Sarah noticed a group of new JASI recruits observing a tactical medical training session. Their expressions held the familiar uncertainty of professionals navigating the space between specialized military backgrounds and civilian transportation roles, the same territory she had struggled through just 6 months earlier. "Give me a minute," she told Elena and Melissa, approaching the group with purpose. The instructor, a former Navy corpsman Sarah had worked with on protocol development, nodded in recognition. "Perfect timing, Matthews. We were just discussing the application of tactical medical assessments in civilian contexts." Sarah turned to the recruits, recognizing in their faces the same divided identity she had carried for 9 years. "The hardest part isn't the skills transition," she said without preamble. "It's the identity integration. You're not becoming something new, you're acknowledging everything you already are." A woman in the front row, flight attendant uniform still visible beneath her training vest, met Sarah's gaze with cautious hope. How do you balance it? The constant awareness without the hypervigilance? It was the question Sarah herself had wrestled with for years, the core challenge that had driven her to compartmentalize her identity rather than integrate it. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have had an answer. Now, she did. "You stopped seeing them as separate modes," she explained. "The situational awareness that made you effective in military operations is the same awareness that makes you an exceptional transportation professional. The medical training that saved lives in combat zones is the same training that serves passengers in crisis. They're not competing identities. They're complementary aspects of a single integrated self." The simplicity of the explanation belied the complex journey required to reach it, but Sarah saw understanding dawn in the recruit's expression. Not complete resolution, but the beginning of a path forward. "Matthews developed much of the integration framework we use now," the instructor added. "Her protocols for adapting combat medical assessment to in-flight emergencies have been implemented across the program." The acknowledgement would have made her uncomfortable 6 months ago, when any recognition of her military background had felt like a threat to her carefully constructed civilian identity. Now it registered as appropriate professional context, neither defining nor limiting, simply factual. As Sarah rejoined Elena and Melissa, the 3 women moved toward the medical simulation area where Captain Donovan was already reviewing the scenario parameters. The simulation would combine elements of conventional in-flight medical emergency response with the complications of potential security implications, a heart attack that might be natural or might be induced, requiring simultaneous medical intervention and security assessment. Perfect scenario for demonstrating the integration we were just discussing. Sarah noted to the recruit who had followed them from the training group, "You're welcome to observe if you'd like." The invitation, casual but deliberate, represented Sarah's evolving approach to mentorship within the JASI program. Rather than formal instruction, she had found that demonstrating integrated professional identity in action provided more powerful guidance for those still navigating the transition. As they prepared for the simulation, Sarah felt a profound sense of alignment. Not the artificial separation of her combat medic and flight attendant identities, nor the uncomfortable collision that had characterized their initial integration, but a natural harmony of complementary capabilities united in common purpose. The past 6 months had transformed her understanding of professional identity. What had once seemed an irreconcilable division between military past and civilian present had evolved into a spectrum of complementary skills, all aspects of a single integrated self. The simulation began, the advanced technology creating a scenario that mirrored the complexity of real-world operations. Sarah moved through it with fluid competence, her responses drawing seamlessly from both her combat medical training and her years of civilian aviation experience. The integration was no longer conscious or effortful, it had become her natural state of being. Later, as they debriefed the simulation results, Elena pulled Sarah aside with the direct approach characteristic of their unit's communication style. "You've changed," she observed without preamble. "When you first joined JASI, you were still fighting against yourself, trying to reconcile identities you thought were in conflict. Now you're just you. Fully present, fully integrated." Sarah considered this assessment, recognizing its accuracy. "The division was never real," she acknowledged. "I created it because I needed separation from what I'd experienced. But the capabilities, the training, the instincts, they were always part of me, whether I acknowledged them or not." "And now?" Elena pressed. "Now I understand that integration doesn't mean erasing boundaries between professional and personal, between military and civilian. It means recognizing that these aren't competing identities but complementary aspects of who I am. A professional whose diverse experiences and capabilities all serve a common purpose." That evening, as Sarah sat with Elena, Captain Donovan, and several other JASI participants at a restaurant near their hotel, the conversation flowed easily between topics both military and civilian. They discussed advanced medical protocols and airline passenger trends, tactical assessments and in-flight service improvements, moving between specialized terminology and casual observations with the comfort of professionals secure in their integrated identities. For Sarah, the dinner represented the culmination of a journey that had begun with the forced-down warthog of her divided existence and culminated in the peaceful integration of all she had been, all she was, and all she was becoming. The weight of separation had lifted, replaced by the grounded certainty of wholeness. As the evening concluded and they prepared to return to their hotel, Sarah's phone chimed with a notification, not the JASI communicator but her personal device. The message was from Dr. Eliza Kent, her former combat trauma supervisor who had provided such crucial guidance during her initial transition to JASI. "Heard you're developing the new in-flight trauma protocols. They're being implemented across 3 airlines next month. The Sarah Matthews the first new in Kandahar would be proud of the Sarah Matthews who exists now, not because you've returned to who you were, but because you've become who you were always meant to be. Integration, not division. Wholeness, not fragmentation. The journey continues, but now you're walking it as your complete self." Sarah smiled as she read the message, recognizing the truth in Eliza's words. The journey did continue, each day bringing new opportunities to apply her integrated capabilities in service of others. But she no longer walked that path divided against herself, exhausted by the effort of maintaining artificial boundaries between aspects of a single integrated identity. In the morning, she would board another flight, perform her duties as a flight attendant, maintain her situational awareness as a JASI participant, and bring her full self to whatever challenges arose. Not because she was two people navigating a complicated balance, but because she was one person whose diverse capabilities had finally found harmony in service of a single integrated purpose. Sarah Matthews, combat medic, flight attendant, JASI operative, mentor, friend, had finally discovered that the strongest form of identity wasn't rigid separation or forced conformity, but fluid integration. The waitress and the warrior, the caregiver and the protector, not competing selves, but complementary aspects of a single authentic whole, united in purpose, and finally, completely at peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.